Spring football is here, but it's time to talk QB. We're here to talk about which QB could or should be leading the race.
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on into Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for giving us a listen today. I'm here with Andrew Gluco from The Last Word on Sports, expert on all things UCF. Andrew, we've been talking a lot of basketball lately, but I wanted to make sure that our friends over at football weren't ignored this spring. Spring practice is in full swing. They released for spring break. The guys will be back. But I want to talk about this QB roster. I still think the most important thing that Scott Frost and McKenzie Milton have to figure out this offseason is who is in the lead for quarterback. Now, like I know, Taven Jackson, transferred in from Indiana, Cam Fancher from FAU, and then you have Dylan Risk, who finished last season. The redshirt freshman took over against the in the BYU game late. Showed some promise throughout the season, played well against Arizona, but ultimately showed why he is a redshirt freshman at the end of the day. Do you have a favorite, Andrew? Quite frankly, do you have a favorite to win this QB race? Or what do you see in the future here for them at QB?
Well, I mean, the easy answer is Taven Jackson. You know, he's a player that kind of fits more the mold of what Scott Frost is looking for. You know, a guy who can move a bit. You know, Dylan Risk can tuck the ball and run, but he's not, the next coming of McKenzie Milton by any stretch of the imagination. Risk looked really good against Arizona, but it's a space game. Weird things happen. Arizona wasn't a good team, but as the season wore on and more game film came out on Risk, he started looking more and more vulnerable. More prone to mistakes, wasn't able to execute as well. That could be partially attributed to the coaches not designing a game plan that evolved enough, but it also could be on the player. So while, he's the incumbent coming into the season, this is a new coaching staff. They're hitting the reset button. So everything's starting from scratch. And with UCF not having a traditional spring game, they're going to have more practices. It's going to give both players an opportunity to try and distinguish themselves. Obviously, Cam Fancher, Ja'Curry Brown, you're going to see both of these guys at it. I think that between Milton and Frost and Cooper, they're going to give all these guys a fair shake. I don't think there's going to be a real preconceived, this is going to be my favorite guy going in. They're going to go with what works. And truth be told, I don't know if the quarterback's the biggest question mark. I think wide receiver is a bigger question mark. It's important to find a good quarterback, the guy who can move the offense, but UCF's massive overhaul in wide receivers, it almost gets to the point. It's like, it doesn't matter if you have no one to throw the ball to. But again, the center point of any offense is a quarterback. He needs to be able to make good reads, good decisions, be accurate. And then, obviously you got to put it at least in a position where your receivers can make plays. If you can't even do that, it doesn't matter how good or bad your receivers are. If you can't put in a position to make a play, they're not going to make a play.
Yeah, I think a good quarterback can make average receivers look great. Ball placement, right? Timing. When those things are there, you got to help your receivers out in that way if you're the QB. And if you're not asking them to make Herculean plays every down, to using all their might and athleticism to just catch the ball. I've been on this. Look, man, I cover a lot of football, and I'll tell you, people who've watched me over the years can tell you I'll die on this hill. Wide receiver is probably the position where you are the least in control of your destiny, because you can run a perfect route. You can juke your guy. You can get open, and they can just not see you, or they can throw the ball out of bounds, or they could do whatever, right? Everybody else, if you're on the line, you got to block the guy in front of you. You're in control of the outcome of that situation. The running backs, the quarterbacks, all the other defensive players, if they do their job, they could have good outcomes. At wide receiver, you can do everything you're asked to do and still not have a good outcome on a play. Taven Jackson is the guy I want to talk about, though, right? This is the guy from Indiana, I think, with the most college playing experience coming into this. What do you see here? Because I think when we see these transfers come through the portal, people assume if there was an NIL commitment that guy might be leading for that reason. But I'm not sure that's the case here. I do like his experience at Indiana, and I think that might weigh into this. But he's got to show something, obviously, in the spring here. He's got to show that experience amounted to something.
Well, yeah, and he started his career at Tennessee, and obviously didn't do a lot there, just a little bit of mop up duty as a redshirt a freshman, and then he played 2 seasons as the other guy at Indiana. He did have some starts, but you look at his numbers, and while nothing flew off the charts, it's hard when you're stuck behind a guy who's just putting together a magical season like what happened last year with the Hoosiers. He came in, did some mop-up duty, played against Washington, was 11 of 19 for 124 yards. I mean, nothing very good, but in the little pockets that he had, more so in 23 more than 24, he looked okay. His best game, as was, against Louisville, 24-34 for 299 yards. Yeah, he had a pick, he had a touchdown, but it was just shy of a 300-yard game. There's potential there. But again, it's the same thing with Dylan Risk. There's potential there. I just think that with Jackson being brought in out of the portal, and he may not have been the first choice. UCF obviously only has so much, to work with. It's still a guy that they want. They wanted him. And I think that it's because they see the skills there and be able to handle the offense that Scott Frost wants to run. You need a quarterback that can think on his feet real quick, that can make decisions real quick, that can physically get off the turf if he gets knocked on his tush, and go back and get a snap off, within 20 seconds. So you need the right kind of player to handle this tempo-based offense. And Gus Malzahn, despite writing the book on no huddle offenses, literally, didn't really run much no huddle for a lot of points during Dylan Risk's time. So there was a lot of slowdown time during when he was a quarterback. So I don't know if it was based on just giving up the play calling, just kind of giving up in general, or if it's a Dylan Risk thing. But the style that was being played that last quarter of the season by UCF is nothing like what Scott Frost wants to implement at UCF.
Yeah. Look, I think that when it comes down to it, they're going to have to figure out a lot here, personally. And when we're looking at what Scott Frost has in front of him, this offseason, or I think this next season is going to be a little bit of a referendum on their ability to be able to develop QBs with this particular group of guys, right? You got a group of guys, Andrew, that need work, right? You don't have a savior in this group, if you ask me. You've got projects. You got to figure out how to make those projects into something productive for UCF on offense. We talked in an episode earlier this week about Scott Frost saying the guys are working on becoming fluent in his system, and they're just barely conversational. If you hope, if anything, that your quarterback is ahead of that process more than any other player, because he is your field general. He's the guy who tells everybody else where to go. He's the guy that guys look to when the chips are down, or when they need direction, or when they need to know what to do. Where am I supposed to be? You look at the quarterback, right? Now, I will say this. I have I call him my second quarterback on the field, but my eyes are going to be on center as well too. I know we're talking quarterback, but like your center is really, really important to directing an offense and a lot of modern offenses as well too. So whether they can get a center and a QB on the same page this spring, I think is going to be super interesting to watch. With the guys that he has. Now, if you're Dylan Risk, you were here last year, and I think that gives you a tiny bit of an edge. But to your point, I don't think they're leaning one way or another. Now, am I leaning one way or another? I still am rooting for Dylan Risk to be the comeback story, the little guy that just rises above story that I think everybody needs. I watched the Mighty Ducks D3 last night. I'm rooting for the underdog. Anyway, final thoughts on this, man. QB this spring. We've asked the question before: do they need to have a leader coming out of the clubhouse? We've asked if they needed a starter, and we agree you don't necessarily need a starter at the end of the spring. But do you need a leader coming out of the clubhouse?
Well, I mean, you need someone, and don't completely write off Cam Fancher.
Okay,
he's by far the most experienced of these guys. Playing. He was basically 2+ years as a starter. He started on and off at FAU. He started last year in 2023 at Marshall, and he took over partway during this in 2022. So I mean, he's got multiple 300-yard games. I mean, so he knows how to chuck the ball. Again, iron shapes iron. So you can use Fancher may not be the best quarterback on the team, but he has experience and he can use that as a way of helping these other players along while also competing for a starting spot, because he's going to get his shot. If obviously you play the best, you're going to get the ball, and bar none. But that experience, that game experience, you can't replicate that. That's why you can't even write off Jakari Brown, because he has game experience too. And he has a different skill set. Believe it or not, with UCF's wide receiver core the way it is, a running guy like Brown may not be a terrible option to look into. You just got to work on his decision-making when it comes to running. But this is going to be a strong running back-led team this year. Obviously, building up towards future years, they're going to work on improving the wide receiver room. There's some new players coming in. It's young, but they lost a lot of star power over after last year. So don't write him off yet, Fancher. But I think all four of these guys are going to get a fair shake. Right now it's about evaluating. Currently, right now, as you said in a previous show, it's about learning the language. Yep. It's about starting to understand what's expected of them. And then as we get further in spring towards those open practices, I think you're going to start to see a degree of separation as players learn the playbook. Who learns it quicker? Who's able to execute quicker? Speed matters. But not only can you execute it fast, can you execute it well? Because speed doesn't matter if you can't execute it well. So Frost and the crew, they got the work cut out for them.
They do have their work cut out for them. Awesome conversation. Andrew, I appreciate you for joining me. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Andrew, you ever check your bank account and wonder where did all my money go?
God, this was this morning. It still hurts.
Between dining out and online shopping and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. You get surprising insights all in one convenience, and it's easy to collab with your partner so that money management is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Andrew Gluco from The Last Word on Sports, man. I want to thank you for joining me. Before we get out of here, as always, tell people where they can find you.
You can catch me on Twitter /X or Blue Sky at StatBoyDrew. And you can catch my work on The Last Word on College Football, a part of The Last Word on Sports family.
Thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. For your next listen, go check out our friends at Locked On Big 12. They're talking about all things Big 12 over there, including the UCF Knights. You can find Locked On Big 12 on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. You can find us here tomorrow on Locked On UCF.